Hey everyone, Jacob here. First off, I want to say sorry for the mess. Doing a little bit of reorganization in the house, so hope you can bear with it. This video is going to be about, let's say that you want to start diving and how to pick an instructor, or let's say you want to do some continuing education, maybe head technical or rebreather, or maybe even just do your advanced. So this is just some of my thoughts on how you should pick your next instructor. Okay, cool, let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing I often hear people say or people talk about is it needs to be a certain agency. In my opinion, that is, for the majority of it, a complete load of it. Of course, there are some agencies, ISC, GUE, UTD, the DIR agencies that require you to be a certain level within their agency for you to continue up. But if we're talking especially, super recreational levels, then forget about agency. Agency is less important than your instructor, which is where we're going to go next. Just before we go to instructor, I also want to talk about dive center. Dive center is super important in some respects, and in others not so much. I mean, you can have an amazing dive center, absolutely amazing. Everything in that dive center is perfect, but still have a bad instructor. And then on the other hand, you can also have an instructor that works for him or herself without a dive center, that maybe uses a dive center through some type of reciprocal agreement or whatever, a bit like what I do. Or you can have just an instructor that works for him or herself with their own company, and that instructor doesn't have an official brick and mortar dive center, but has everything that you need to do, but it may be an instructor that suits you more. So yeah, again, instructor is more important than the dive center. Okay, now the instructor. This is a bit of a, it's a bit of a long one, a bit of a complicated one, and I'm sure there'll be some varying opinions on it. But in my opinion, it is the most important thing. If you do not have a good click with your instructor, then the learning process is going to be significantly harder for you and for the instructor to teach you. If you don't have any relationship with that person, I mean, if you don't have a good click with them, then the whole process is going to be a much less smooth thing. So it's always a good idea before you start or do anything is to try and sit down with that instructor and get a little bit of gauge their personality. It doesn't have to be a super intense diving conversation. You can just sit down, have a cup of coffee or whatever, Coca-Cola. This is not sponsored by Coca-Cola. It'd be super nice if it was. I'd be rich. Anyway, sit down and just have a conversation with them, see what they're like as a person, see if there's anything that you can, connect with them on. If you can't, if there's nothing, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a bad instructor or a bad instructor for you. It just means that that process of you two finding common ground is going to probably be a little bit harder. After you've had that coffee conversation with that person, then you should start trying to talk about diving. This is obviously if you are already a diver, because you need to know what type of diving that person likes and what type of diving that person does. you may have a person you have a super amazing click with, that you all of a sudden you've met this person, you've met this instructor, and you're like, wow, you know, we could be best mates. We could go to the bar and enjoy a beer together, be best man at their wedding, whatever it happens to be. But if that person doesn't do the type of diving that you want to learn on a regular basis, they're probably not the best person for you to learn from that particular skill. For example, if you go and meet Dave. Dave's a made-up person, but you go and meet Dave. Dave teaches 90% of his students open water, and he therefore dives most of his time on a single tank setup, 10 meters depth. That's where he spends most of his time. That may not be the perfect person for you to go and do a hypoxic trimix course with, a 100-meter course, simply because his skills may not be sharp enough on that particular setup in order to pass that knowledge on to you. This is something that sort of hits home a little bit for me. I did my initial tech instructor with a course director that was a recreational course director. Didn't really like technical diving, didn't really like to go deep, felt not comfortable deep, but I did my technical instructor course with him and my technical diver level also, but I didn't get very much out of it. It wasn't until later, when I really started to sort of link up with some other real technical divers, that I really started to, you know, get a really big learning curve. What I walked away from that course was with less money in my pocket, but not that much more knowledge or skills that I could then transfer onto my students. So I walked out of there, yeah, I had my rating, yep, I was a bona fide technical instructor, but I was not comfortable teaching anybody at that level because I simply felt that I was not ready to do that. I should have said something in the course, 100% I should have, but I didn't. I was like, okay, this person is an instructor trainer, so yeah, he must know, must be what it is. But it turns out not at all. So this is some of these things that you should think about when you are looking at an instructor, especially if you're trying to do something continuing. Does that person dive at the level that you want to learn at? Super important, in my opinion. Way more important than geographical location. But speaking of geographical location, I think that geographical location for your instructor shouldn't particularly matter. If you look at it in the terms of when you pick the university that you want to go to, do you go to the university that's 5 minutes up the road? Or do you go to maybe the university which is going to do more things along the line that you like, but it's maybe 2 hours away? Or it's maybe 8 hours on a plane to Mexico, or to Florida, or to Egypt, or to Australia, or wherever it happens to be. That shouldn't play into, you know, your decision on where to do a course. That being said, however, if you go and do a course, let's say that you live in Sweden, which is nice and warm in winter, as you could imagine. If you live in Sweden and you do your course in Thailand, those skills are probably not straight away transferable back to Sweden. So yes, you may get that knowledge of that course in Thailand. You may have an amazing instructor that teaches you absolutely everything that you need to know, but all those skills that you learned in Thailand may not be instantly transferable back to Sweden. So you should still try and, once you get back to Sweden, try and find an instructor or an experienced person to help give you those little tips and tricks so that it's better for you in the, you know, whatever conditions you happen to be diving in. So if you do cave diving, let's say in France, that's drastically different to doing the cenotes in Mexico or cave diving in Mexico. They are vastly different. France is cold, and therefore, you know, even on, you're wearing dry gloves and not wet gloves or no gloves. So everything that you're doing is maybe a little bit more complicated, a little bit more cumbersome. You may be diving steel tanks in France, but you're diving aluminium tanks in Mexico. It's just all these small things that you may need to get your skills topped up, depending on where you are in the world. Okay, so the next thing. So you've established that your instructor that you've picked dives at the level that you want. Now, ask them what their experience is at that level. I know plenty of people that are certified instructors for all sorts of levels that are very, very competent divers. They're amazing divers at that level, but they don't possess the knowledge or the know-how in order to transfer that to you as a student. So also ask them what their experience is teaching at that level, if they've taught 500 students, if they've taught no students, if they've taught whatever. So find out what their experience is at that level. Again, this is not a deal breaker. I mean, every instructor has to start somewhere. Like I said, there are some amazing instructors out there that have very little experience. You might be there first, and you might turn out to be absolutely amazing. So, you know, don't let that be a deal breaker, but be something that you're aware of, because that instructor may also, you know, be finding their groove on how to do things. So it's all about setting expectations. I'm not saying don't pick an instructor because of that, but just have it in the back of your mind that, you know, it may be one of these first times that this instructor's taught, blah, blah, blah. So just something to be mindful of. Another thing you should talk about that instructor with, this is more for people that are going to continuing education as opposed to people that are just starting, but there are also some similarities with it. Okay, another thing is you need to make sure that that instructor dives the style of diving that you want to do. This is not as important for people that are just starting, but it's more for people that are doing continuing education, but there are still some, you know, some crossover points. For example, if you want to dive the DIR style, so you want to dive a backplate and a wing and a long hose and a regulator and a necklace, all of those things, cool, that's how I like to dive, so no judgments from me. If your instructor doesn't dive that way, then that could create a problem. Again, maybe. It's a definite maybe. Maybe that instructor is knowledgeable enough to work around it and deal with the way that you want to dive. But I've always found it easier to have an instructor that dives the way that I like to dive. Not saying that they are bad instructors, it's just, again, it's a fit. In your coffee conversation, also talk about how they dive, their style of diving, if it's going to match with you. All right, so that's just sort of some of my thoughts on picking a dive instructor. I mean, I know what I said before, if you're traveling to somewhere like Mexico, for example, then it's going to be hard for you to sit down and have a coffee with them. However, most instructors that are worth their salt will make the time to have a quick Zoom call with you, or Microsoft Teams, or whatever, some type of online talk with you before you go there and do your course. Of course, there are exceptions, but I have never come across a dive shop who's refused to have a phone conversation with somebody about all of this. So you can always just jump on the phone or jump on a Zoom call gone are the days, especially now that in this whole COVID pandemic thing, where people refuse or don't have access to a Zoom or Microsoft Teams or something. I find myself doing a lot more online than I ever have. And if I can do it, most everybody can do it, I'm sure. So yeah, make a phone call, send an email, set up a video chat, talk to them, ask those questions before. There's probably more things that you could ask, but I think I've covered almost the basics. If you have any questions or concerns, or want any more clarification, anything that I said, let me know down below. Yeah, if you liked the video, like and subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Dive safe.